This video is all about foreclosures, and my #1 goal is to make you feel more at home with that entire process. Let's get right to it. Hey guys, Nicholas Montier here with Home with Nick. Thank you so much for watching my channel today. Please subscribe, like that like button, all of that good jazz. Let's get that out of the way so that we can go ahead and actually tune into this video about foreclosures. You're probably wondering, I want to buy a foreclosure. How do I go ahead and do this? Here are some tips and tricks on what you actually need to know. So first things first, let's start with a little history lesson so you understand why foreclosures are such a big topic nowadays. Anyways, this goes back to the 2008-2009 housing crisis that we had not too long ago that we all remember very well.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated. Merrill Lynch, fearing it could be next, agreed in an act of desperation to a shotgun marriage with Bank of America.
12 million households now owe more than their homes are worth.
Well, foreclosures before that point were actually very, very hard to find. And in fact, there weren't a lot of facilities or websites or anywhere where you actually could go to actually buy foreclosures in an easy manner. Usually you had to know somebody on the inside or an investor or a banker or somebody like that and be able to buy them through an inside source. Now there are so many sites out there, which we'll get into a little bit later today. But again, remember during the 2008-2009 crisis, why the term foreclosure has become such a fluent term for all of us now is the fact that nearly 870,000 families actually lost their homes back in 2008 with 3.1 million filings for foreclosure. That's 3.1 million filings for foreclosure during that time.
If you are watching us from the last home you'll ever own tonight, consider yourself lucky.
So the term foreclosure that we use today is very common only due to the fact that that hardship that our country undertook back in 2008-2009. Now, a few things before we get started. You guys need to know the actual 4 steps that there actually are to foreclosure, and they're not really steps, but they're different phases that a property potentially could be in. And that first one is that pre-foreclosure phase. Now, this is not an actual listing, and you're probably thinking, well, I've seen pre-foreclosures on Zillow, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, it's a little more to it than what Zillow is probably telling you, unless there's an amazing definition somewhere that I'm not aware about. But pre-foreclosure basically means that a notice of default has been issued on the property, which likely means that that seller has been behind on their payments for likely 1 to usually 60 days or more. And so now it triggers a pre-foreclosure flag or a notice of default flag. Now, you may be thinking, can I swoop in there? Can I write an offer? What can I do? Yes, you absolutely can. And you could actually send a nice letter, which is what I would recommend to these pre-foreclosure properties, explaining your story, explaining why you want to actually help these people and offer just financial assistance during this time, because really you buying that home for them at this point in time, if they can't make their payments further, would actually be of assistance. Here's the catch. There's likely a lot of investors who are organically doing this through multiple systems that they have set up. And in fact, there are a lot of very savvy, cash-heavy pocket investors. I don't know how you say that. They got a lot of money. That's the truth. And you're competing against them. So if you're a first-time home buyer watching this and you have less than 20% down, you're likely going to have a hard time actually getting in between those all-cash buyers who can swoop in and give, let's just say, a better deal for that seller. Now, it's not to say that it's impossible, and I still would strongly encourage you look at pre-foreclosures. Just don't make it your entire absolute search for a home or a property that you're trying to invest in. Probably not the best avenue to put all your eggs into that basket. You can go ahead and get a list of pre-foreclosures and all other various statuses that we're actually going to be talking about today through other really great websites like realtytrack.com, auction.com, propertyradiant.com under their foreclosure tab. You can go ahead and get those resources, a lot of these statuses and properties ahead of time before sometimes even the public knows about them. A lot of these sites do require you to create an account. Some of them you actually do have to pay for, which they offer a free trial beforehand. Just be aware of that before you actually visit those, as it's kind of under a lock and key situation. Now let's say that it moves on to the next phase of our pre-foreclosure status or our foreclosure status, which is actually going to be our short sale phase. Now again, not every property goes through pre-foreclosure first before they can go to a short sale, but that is the common thing to happen. And the term short sale really comes from basically a borrower who has gotten into financial hardship or can't pay their bills, can't pay their mortgage, contacted their lender and said, listen, I'm gonna need to short you because I can't make the payment. So because they're shorting the bank, it becomes a short sale. You see? Short sale, short the bank. That's where the term comes from, if you didn't know. So again, since they're shorting the bank, now the lender is involved, and so now short sales typically hit the market for all to see. You'll usually see a realtor involved listing that home, and again, they're not necessarily a short sales specialist, they're just a realtor usually locally or in that market, or maybe a friend of the actual seller at hand who's listing that home. So it doesn't mean that they actually have access to other short sales, it just means that they are there to list that property specifically. Something to keep in mind. Now again, the lender is now, or the bank is involved with this property. So when you go ahead and submit an offer on a short sale, something you need to keep in mind is that it's always going to be subject to lender approval or bank approval, which means you may submit an offer, but if it's too low or you're trying to lowball them too much, they might come back and say, no, we're only going to approve it at X amount of dollars, which is usually whatever the market value is to the bank. Now, again, keep in mind that you may go back and forth with that bank several times, but they may not budge. And that's where sometimes short sales are not going to be the best deal, but you could get a deal on a short sale, not that it can't be done. Keep in mind too, this is the other factor with all of these phases today, is that you're going to have a lot of competition. So if it's a short sale that's a really great deal, likely you're going to be dealing with all cash buyers, and of course that lender would rather take somebody with a, let's say all cash offer than an actual loan, less contingencies, less risk. That bank would rather sign off on that competitor to you, that all cash offer investor, instead of going with you yourself, that first time home buyer. Something to keep in mind with short sales, and this is going to be a trend today, is the fact that the sale could take a very, 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 very long time. So again, that's because you're dealing with the bank and they're having to negotiate. There's usually a short sale negotiator involved, and there's a lot of middleman talk happening, which means that it takes a lot longer for that bank to go ahead and sign off and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to take less for this property than I normally would have gotten on the open market. So again, keep in mind that the short sale is typically going to be a longer process. So if you're looking at a traditional 30-day escrow or even shorter, because you're an all-cash buyer, you may not get that scenario with a short sale property. The next phase of our foreclosure process, which I think is very popular, and have you ever had a friend go, oh, I'm going to go to a property auction, or I'm going to go buy this house at auction? That's our trustee sale or sheriff sale part of the transaction, or part of the process. And again, remember that this is not necessarily a friendly place for a first-time home buyer, and here is why. Typically, you're going to go into a trustee sale at your courthouse steps. So whatever your local government is, you would go there, and that's where the notice of trustee sale is actually going to happen. And again, there will be a scheduled date where all bidders are open to come to that centralized location and bid on that property. Now, keep in mind, they're typically going to demand all cash offers, which means if you do not have all cash, you're likely going to have to go out and get a Uncle Freddie loan, as I call them, or a hard money loan, which for you first-time home buyers might scare you a little bit because the interest rates could be as high as 10, 12, 13, 14, 15% if you don't know what you're doing. So again, trustee sales are where you're on courthouse steps, you're overbidding, you're dealing with a lot of very savvy investors. It's not the greatest place for a first-time home buyer, but you can get an amazing deal if you know what you're doing. Keep in mind that at an auction or a trustee sale, you're going to have no disclosure. The property is going to be sold as is. So I hope that you've done some due diligence ahead of time before that actual auction date, maybe gone and tried to scope out the property a little bit, sneak a contractor in there or sneak an inspector in there, even if maybe you're not supposed to. My advice, again, I'm not telling you that you need to do that. I'm just saying it could happen. It could happen. Just think about it. But again, you're not going to have any disclosure. It's going to be sold as is. So for those of you that are kind of novice to the whole real estate world, think about this, that you're buying a property that you know absolutely nothing about at an auction for a great price. And so I went ahead and I looked up a formula from Dave Ramsey that I thought was actually pretty good and a pretty safe bet, I thought, compared to other stuff that I saw out there. And he says that you need to buy a property at 80%. Your offer should be 80% of the actual market value minus repairs. So if a house, let's say, is worth 100 grand for illustration purposes, and you go ahead and want to write the offer at 80,000 because that's 80% of that 100. Let's say you find out that repairs are another $20,000 on that property. So now my offer would be 60,000 because then 80,000 minus that 20,000 would be a $60,000 offer. Now again, that's fantastic. If you can get a deal like that, I think that's great from my experience. I know in our market in Southern California, it's a little more competitive, so you're probably not going to have those amazing margins. But if you can in your local market, I highly encourage you to model yourself after that Dave Ramsey equation. Now again, at a trustee sale, properties don't necessarily sell because they do have to sell for a certain amount of whatever that debt is on that property. So again, a lot of times the lender who actually has the lien on that property, if the bids do not amount to the right offer amount, they'll go ahead and swoop in. That property will not sell at trustee sale, which moves us on to our last step on the foreclosure train, and that's going to be an REO, or a real estate owned property. So what you need to know about an REO is the fact that now the bank has full ownership of the property. It's gone through all of its phases, and now it is sitting there, and it's probably in the worst condition of its life as far as that house goes. Now keep in mind, REOs are those foreclosure properties that you see, like this scary house right here, where there's probably been vandalism, there's probably been plumbing issues, electrical issues, and nobody's paid attention to this house for a very, very, very long time, which means there's probably a high repair bill at some point, or high cosmetic repair bill at some point very soon, if you happen to be the new owner of it. Another thing to keep in mind is that bank is now the owner, so the seller is completely out of the picture, which is great on one hand because the bank sometimes is actually easier to deal with than that distressed seller, like maybe with a short sale where you have to deal with both parties. And keep in mind, if that bank is now the owner, you don't necessarily have any disclosure on what the property has been through. So again, kind of like that trustee sale, no disclosure whatsoever on the property, which means you're going in there completely blind as to the history of that home, which is why I strongly encourage you to get a real estate agent who knows what they're doing. Working with a realtor who's worked with REOs before foreclosures or any type of foreclosure property is always a really good asset for you because they're going to understand the processes. They're going to help you look at title. They're going to help you understand a lot of the ins and outs of that foreclosure to help save you a lot of time and money. So if you're planning on doing this on your own, I would highly suggest that you actually bring on a realtor at some point in the process because, again, such a great asset to have, not just for investigational purposes, but for title and all other things about that home that you're going to need to know. Now, a big question is, can I buy a foreclosure with a loan? You absolutely can, an REO especially. Trustee sale, you cannot. Short sale, you can as well. But keep in mind, obviously in pre-foreclosure, you could too. But keep in mind, if the property's in such bad condition, one of the issues that you're going to find is that you likely cannot get a loan on it. So for an REO, getting a loan on an REO is going to be incredibly challenging. But the bank is open to financing. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to go ahead and probably file for an FHA 203K loan or some other kind of rehabilitation home. So for you first-time home buyers who are looking to do the fix and flip thing right off the bat, you definitely can. You just need to make sure that you're getting the right loan for that property. And again, an FHA 203K loan is an amazing opportunity. I'll go ahead and put the link for that type of loan or more information on it below so you can kind of educate yourself if that's something that you want to do. Now, an FHA 203K loan is not for everybody and nor will everybody qualify for it. So I don't want to say like it's a one size fits all. There are other kind of construction or modification loans you can do that will go ahead and help you with that fix and flip type of scenario. Again, there's always hard money loans. Just watch for those interest rates. Just a couple of things to keep in mind. So what are my overall takes from this entire foreclosure process? I would say, guys, that there's going to be a lot of competition for you along the way. So if you're one of those people that wants to go out there and get a great deal, remember that there's so many eyes on those great deals out there. And again, foreclosures happen to be one of the great markets where there are a lot of great deals. But keep in mind that that market has been consistently shrinking for the last 10 years and will continue probably to shrink as long as our housing market stays healthy. Another thing to keep in mind is to bring on a realtor as soon as possible because I think they can be an incredible asset for you along this journey. Also, be sure to get a great lender as well, maybe somebody who's used to dealing with these sorts of transactions. Again, having that dynamic duo is going to be incredibly beneficial for you, far beyond any kind of repairs or anything that you're going to see on that home. Which brings me to my last point. There's likely going to be a lot of hidden costs and repairs and different things that you did not expect to deal with, especially if you're a first-time home buyer and not a savvy investor. So be aware of all the different repairs and things that are involved when you're actually doing a foreclosure process. Have, again, a savvy handyman or construction person on your side, somebody that can help guide you along the way to say, hey, this is going to cost this much, this is going to cost this much, and again, give you that clarity that you need because one thing that about foreclosures that there isn't is transparency. The last thing I want to leave you with, which I thought was a huge red flag in my research, is the fact that there's something called a redemption period, and you need to be very aware of this depending on what state you live in. I will put a link below for more information, but a redemption period is basically where the seller previously who lost their home has the right to actually come back and buy that property at the market value that you purchased it at, plus any fees or interest that have actually accrued over the time that you've owned the property and purchase it back. So yes, you could go through this entire process, and depending on the redemption period of where you live, that seller could come back and reclaim that property as their right by their state. So huge red flag. Again, if you plan on getting down and dirty really fast, you might want to hold off until that redemption period has passed and don't put in the time and effort just to then give it to somebody else. Again, check your local state guidelines. And again, I'm not an attorney giving you any legal advice today or a tax professional giving you any tax advice today. I'm just trying to give you some advice and give you some guidance based on my research and my know-how from my own life experience. Again, guys, these have been my key takeaways. I hope you know how to go out there and rock it as far as foreclosures goes. And again, if you have any further questions or concerns for me here at Home with Nick, feel free to chime in below. Don't forget to subscribe again. I really appreciate it. Also, feel free to hit the notification bell and like this video so that YouTube algorithm can get this video out to more people. That's my whole goal, to spread that real estate education, whether you buy, sell near or far. This has been Nicholas Montier with Home with Nick. Thank you so much for watching.